It reminds me of my own spiritual journey. Back in my Christian days, trying so hard to avoid mistakes to live holy. Can we really avoid mistakes to live holy? Or walk the spiritual path perfectly? Or we end up pretending to be something we are not? Hi beautiful souls, I'm Beatrice and I welcome you back to my Journey Faithful Compassion Hub. Today I'm reacting to a fascinating talk from Sri Harold Klemp about Paul Twitchell, the founder of Eckankar. Before we start, I just want to remind you that this is not the official page of Eckankar. I'm simply sharing my understanding from my studies and my journey. And honestly, what struck me most is how Paul was and how this makes spiritual growth feel possible for all of us, no matter our path.
Well, there are a couple of things we want to cover this weekend. And the first part, this evening, I'd like to talk more about Paul Twitchell, some of the things that I've been finding out. Tomorrow night, I'd like to speak about the writings of Paul Twitchell. And then on Sunday morning, I would like to speak about the initiations in Eck. And as you know, of course, everything we are geared for here is spiritual freedom. And I don't know if there's a moral you ever want to give to something. You won't find spiritual freedom on earth in a motel if you're the only male with two females, your wife and your daughter, and there's only one bathroom. Last night I got in the room a little on the late side, was after my wife and daughter had already gone to bed. And so we had two doubles in there. And I like rooms so that when I get out of bed, I can get out of bed, you know, in case the alarm goes off or something. I just like to get out, you know. And so, of course, my daughter, she was the first one to bed, and she looks at the two beds, and she likes space, so she takes the one that has a lot of room on both sides. And then my wife went to bed second, and she looked, and she says, well, I like to walk right up to bed, too. And so she took the bed by the wall, but the side you could get to. Yeah. And so I came in, and then I couldn't even find a place to put my clothes, because if you're with a family like that, they got their clothes here, they got their clothes there. And I says, where am I going to put my clothes? And then I found out I can't even get to the bed. So I grumbled about that. And my wife was asleep. She opened her eyes and she just looked at me, and I knew she wasn't really in the body, really. And you feel so helpless when they look back at you and don't answer your question, but they ask you another question, and she says, do you know how to set the clock radio? The lights were out. I finally got in bed, and I said, no. Don't know. Don't care to know. And so it bothered her, my wife. And she tossed and turned until 2:15 in the morning, because she couldn't sleep, worrying because she had to get up at 6:30 to go to breakfast. And well, then at 2:15 she finally did it and got out of bed. And then she wanted light, so she went to the bathroom light for indirect lighting. And then she walked back to the radio, the clock radio, and trying to make up her mind, how is she going to get this clock working before morning? Back and forth, and I'm stewing, of course. And so finally she does the obvious thing. She goes to the phone and dials it, and she calls down to the desk and said, I would like a wake-up call for 6:30 in the morning. And she said it loud enough. I said, oh no, and my daughter said the same thing. And then there were two of us so mad that we couldn't sleep. And so you frittered the night away. Well, so if you're giving morals to stories, I'm not real sure what kind of moral to give here. But if you want spiritual freedom, it's not here. Oh, we have freedom in the physical world, but it's limited, and we look for the spiritual freedom, which is in a state of consciousness, of course. Well, I'd like to talk about Paul tonight because I don't know how better to say this, but he was a rascal on the one hand, but he was a person who had to go through many, many experiences of all kinds so that he would be fit to become the Mahanta, the living Ekmaster. And to call his life a checkered life is understating the whole thing. In January, I got to look at some of the letters that he had written over the years, and he just wrote letters and letters and letters, and they were private letters, and he always made a carbon copy. And there were times you couldn't quite figure out if this was Paul Twitchell or if this was another mask of Paul Twitchell. Because he was a pulp writer, he wrote for the pulps in the days because this is how he made his living. And he was in the Navy, he was writing copy for public relations. And so he was always thinking, always writing. And sometimes it becomes difficult as you go through the letters and you trace this person and you find a unique being, to say the very least. Highly talented and someone who really and sincerely cared about unfoldment and spiritual growth. Someone who cared to go through volumes of books in those days on consciousness, which was not in vogue in those days and is barely in vogue today. He loved it, he thrived on it, he loved going through philosophies.
So, Harold starts with this funny story. When he walks into a motel room, his wife and daughter are already in bed and there's chaos everywhere. It's the kind of night I'm sure we all have had. Frustrating, messy, impossible. And he makes a point. You won't find spiritual freedom in a motel. And I thought, yes, we are all searching for peace, for freedom, but life doesn't hand it over to us on a silver platter. Spiritual freedom is something inside, something we cultivate even when life is a mess. Then Harold started talking about Paul Twitchell. Here is where it really hits me. Paul was a rascal. He cried, he got frustrated, made mistakes, he even got beaten at one point. But he cared deeply about spiritual growth and preparing his life as a Mahanta, a living master. And the first lesson here is powerful. No matter who you are, even someone destined for spiritual mastery is human. He faced struggles, setbacks, and confusion just like us. It reminds me of my own spiritual journey. Back in my Christian days, trying so hard to avoid mistakes to live holy. Can we really avoid mistakes to live holy? Or walk the spiritual path perfectly? Or we end up pretending to be something we are not? When we live like this, we keep ourselves stagnant because we lack an understanding of conscious awareness. We don't understand our purpose as soul. That's why I'm so grateful I found Eckankar, or Eckankar found me. It opened my spiritual eyes and helped me understand my soul's journey and taught me to understand myself in a deeper, more honest way.
A couple of years ago, I decided to research back to his past life in 1811 when he was born on the Mississippi. And it was quite interesting. Somewhere he had said, I believe in the spiritual notebook or somewhere, at the moment of birth, at that time, a huge earthquake rocked the United States, and it formed a lake, and I believe it's in Tennessee or somewhere down there, and it was Lake Reelfoot. And the earthquake in 1811 came at a time when the world was in turmoil. Napoleon was marching across Europe, probably in the same way that Hitler, in our memory today, was marching across Europe. The world was turned upside down, and at this time, in 1811, came this series of earthquakes that hit the Midwest, which actually was the most serious and greatest earthquake that ever hit the United States, far greater than the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. And it lasted through November. Well, they had tremors in November, December, or maybe not December, but January, and even as late as March. They came in 3 main groups. And the only reason there wasn't more loss of life or destruction of property is because just in that region, there just weren't very many people. And this is the time in which he came in his last life. And this is also the logical connecting point which then led up to the Drums of Eck, where he tried to give the story about his service in another lifetime. He had a great fascination with the Civil War, and he and his father used to have contests with each other to see who knew one insignificant fact, and then his dad would challenge him on another insignificant fact, and they'd always see if they knew the answer, which regiment was this, and they try to put names and dates together, and this was kind of a little game that supposedly was played between Paul's father and Paul. Well, then Paul came into this life. There are several different records at this time about when Paul was born. One person I talked to said the family Bible back there said 1910, and another person told me he read the family Bible and it was 1908. And it's amazing how people, all of us, we are so sure we know truth if we see it with our own eyes. But as soon as we start comparing stories, somewhere the stories are different and no one knows why, but everybody is right. Old number 1 is right. And so some of the accounts say he was born on October 23rd, 1908 or 1910, and other accounts say he was born on October 22nd. And of course, you see the tie-in very nicely. Paul loved his privacy, and already early in his youth, he did a lot of things, and one of them was to obscure any fact associated with his life. He didn't want anyone to know what he did at any one time, and he left a trail that was so clouded that it's going to take our historians a couple of years to be exactly sure what really happened. They're going to be pretty sure for a while, but there are always going to be facts plugged in here and there, here and there, here and there. Is this really what Paul did? Is this where he was at the time? And so forth. Paul had the philosophy, I suppose, that today with the taxes being so high, there are the tax protesters, and what they do is they won't use any credit cards, and they won't use any bank accounts or anything like this. And if they have a job, they have to pay the Social Security. And so in a way they feel, well, this is the best way to show my protest against the tax system, is not participate in it, but you always are participated in it already in some way before you had a voice in it, like maybe your Social Security card and all this. But Paul was of the other school. He says, well, if you want to obscure your trail, and I imagine somebody who's on the tax thing would say, hey, what you do is if you want to obscure your record and lose it, he said the computers are known to spew out so much information that man simply can't keep up. Why, it's simple. You take out this bank account and You open another bank account. You transfer a little bit of this money in here, but you open another account and put it here. And then you open up something with a stock, and then you lose a little bit with the stocks, and then you close your first account and put it here. Then you buy some property over here, but you sell it for a loss here, and then you do it as an investment here. And this is Paul's philosophy. I believe he kept adding on so much that it takes a little bit to scramble out from under and figure out who he was. And I was very curious about who was the man behind the Mahanta, the living Ekmaster who came out in 1965. He was a curious person. He was athletic. He was short, of course, 5.5 feet tall, as most of you know. And he had a very powerful upper physique, and his legs on down, he was rather bow-legged, and some people joked, when he was walking down the street, some of the people who didn't think so kindly of him as we do, they said, well, you could almost run a billy goat between his legs, His first jobs that he took were as a physical education instructor shortly after he came out of high school. It's hard to tell exactly when he came out of high school, back in the early 30s, because then high school was different from what it is today. Now we know that by the time you're 18, generally, if you've run the course of education, you will graduate from high school at 18. But in those days, high school was pretty much more the way college or perhaps a university is today when you go back that far. And so maybe he graduated from high school when he was 19, maybe when he was 23, I couldn't rightly tell you. And he took these jobs as a physical education teacher, and he did it as part of the YMCA in one town and the YMCA in another town. And at the same time, he was the director of municipal recreation in Paducah, Kentucky, which in the book In My Soul, I'm Free was called China Point. And there is no China Point, of course, as you know, most of you know. But he built a story to protect his family so that when people would come to him later and about Eckankar, that his family, if they didn't believe in Eckankar, they wouldn't be bothered and pestered by well-meaning people who intruded in their lives, well-meaning, but not wanted. And so he constructed this whole fabric, and he wrote in and he wove, and you say, gee whiz, why'd he do all that? And so, at one point, I believe I've written about it recently, he decided at the grand age of 27, it was about time that he got his name in Kentucky's Who's Who. And this is where all the renowned men come in the state who have done great things, who are great lawyers, great politicians, great doctors, and people of this caliber. Well, Paul was 27 years old, and the most he'd ever been actually was a physical education teacher of some sort. And he was a physical education teacher in 2 places at the same time. And he strung these out, he twisted them in and out, so that by the time he finished, he had a nice little paragraph about all the grand achievements of Paul Twitchell. And it was quite impressive. And you can just see the editor for Who's Who in Kentucky. He's getting all these entries, and it's a tiring thing, and he's saying, oh, gee, another hour before I go home, reading this dull stuff. And here comes something that looks pretty good on the surface, and he just doesn't check the dates too much. He says, oh, why not, puts it in, and Paul gets into Who's Who, And this at an age when he had barely grown whiskers on his face, I imagine. After this time, there are a lot of dark years to Paul, but I'm bringing up some of these things because they're important to see that someone who's in training for the mastership is a prototype for the initiates in Ek. When you say, I have troubles and I have problems, I am crying and I am weary, Paul cried and was weary too. In fact, sometimes life was so much for him, he didn't know how he would get up and face another day.
Paul was constantly writing letters, copies, you name it. He had multiple jobs. He competed with his father on historical facts for fun. And even though he looked ordinary on the surface, he was quietly preparing for something extraordinary. Think about that. While we scroll our phones, Paul was quietly building skills and experience that would eventually make him a spiritual master. Sometimes our small daily choices are like seed we don't even realize we are planting. And this part of his story makes me think about how often people judge others without seeing the full picture. Paul made mistakes. He was misunderstood. Some even judged him harshly, but he kept going. How often do we let people's opinions pull us down, or stop us from following our path, or even label someone based on what they've been through? This is a reminder for me, maybe for you too. Growth comes with patience, humility, and focus. Judgment don't define a person or their spiritual path. They are just part of the chaos in the world we have to navigate. Even today, if someone divorces, people call names and put labels on them. And yet, if we really understand the spiritual perspective Eckankar teaches, everything that happens is a lesson. There is no judging, there is growth. Paul went through heartbreak, separation, and challenges, and all of it became part of his journey towards enlightenment. So, I ask myself, how often do we look beyond appearance? How often do we allow spiritual lessons to be our focus instead of what others think? Here is the takeaway for all of us. How many of us bring consciousness and awareness into everything we do? How often do we pause, reflect, and truly see what's happening in our lives? Paul's life shows us that consciousness and awareness, even in the midst of chaos, mistakes, and messiness, can help us live peacefully and grow spiritually. Imagine if we practice that daily, noticing, reflecting, learning. Our life wouldn't be perfect, but our inner freedom would grow anyway. Wow, there's already so much to think about. Paul's life reminds us that spiritual growth isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, awareness, and learning from everything life throws at us. If any of this story resonates with you, then I encourage you to follow along. In part 2, we'll go deeper into his journey, the spiritual lessons, and how we can apply them today. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Trust me, you will want to see how it all unfolds. And if this video inspired a reflection, leave a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts and how we can bring more awareness and consciousness into our everyday life. I love you all. May the blessings be.